Well, ladies and gentlemen, we, the judges, just want to express our pleasure at being part of the Siemens Competition for Math, Science, and Technology today. It just underscores the fact that learning is a lifelong endeavor, and we're still learning from the students and the presentations here today. So we thank you for the gift from the students today. And our last presentation is by Caelan Garrett from Thomas Jefferson High School for Science and Technology here in Alexandria, Virginia. And he'll be speaking about an image processing system for enhancing perceptual visibility of imagery. Caelan.
Good afternoon. My name is Caelan Garrett. I'm from Thomas Jefferson High School for Science and Technology, and I'll be talking about an image processing system for enhancing perceptual visibility of imagery. So the goal of this project was to take images that are convoluted by different obscuring materials, materials that hide important details under images, and enhance them so that humans could perceive information about the image itself. And here's just one good example of an image where we can't really tell what's happening underneath this heavy smoke. To do this, I implemented a system with 3 different stages. There's pre-processing, there's the adapted Retnex algorithm itself, which I adapted from previous theories, and there's post-processing. Then I tested the effectiveness of this metric using a local contrast metric, local contrast metrics, excuse me. And then I applied this system to many different types of imagery to see how effective it was across the border. And I applied it to types such as foggy images, smoky images, images convoluted by or obscured by shadows, blizzards, and underwater haze, etc. And just an example of the power of this system. When I process this image, that's essential details are improved in the image itself, and you can see a lot more color and a lot more contrast. Okay, so the Retnex algorithm itself. So Retnex theory was proposed by Edwin Land in 1959 as an equation to model how the human eye, the retina, and cortex work together to process what we see every day in real life. And he basically stated that, well, his theory provides how humans regulate the incoming flux into our eye to provide color constancy in different luminances. For example, if you look around the room, everything generally looks decently well lit. However, if you take a picture from the exact location, it won't look as well lighted. And so the brain adapts for this and processes this. This algorithm was then applied to digital image processing directly and is being used really frequently with neural networks and facial recognition. And the fundamental principle behind this is it's the logarithmic ratio between a pixel and its background, as represented here, where a pixel is eye, and the background is represented by the convolution of a Gaussian surround function and the image. And the surround function is right here. So the overview of the system. This system was written in C++ using the libtiff and the fastest Fourier transform in the West libraries. And as I said, it has 3 parts. The pre-processing in white is just taking the original input, doing a quick calculation on it, and then getting it set up for the core of the system, which is the adaptive Retnex algorithm itself, which I defined in black. And then post-processing helps improve the output and enhance the image. That's here. For initial processing, this system reads input as a series of TIFF files, or not TIFF files, but of TIFFs. And it does all the processing and the RGB color space operating independently in each channel. So the first most important thing in the pre-processing, which happens, is I create a method that determines areas on an image that have very low contrast. To do this, I create a kind of a breadth-first flood fill search, which identifies these different areas that have very similar intensities but very low contrast. For example, on this image, we have a huge shadow across it. And so when I run this method, it identifies these parts because they share 2 common things. They share a common intensity, and they share the lack of contrast. And then it stores this value as later to be used as a center or a vertical asymptote. Then the image is padded to prevent wraparound from the cyclic nature of the Fourier transform, which brings us to how I use the fast Fourier transform to speed up the convolution operation. As I mentioned before, the background is turned by the convolution of a Gaussian surround function and the image. And instead of just doing a straight convolution, I use a mathematical theorem which states that the inverse Fourier transform of the product, the Fourier transform of 2 functions equals the convolution of the 2 functions. And this speeds up the time significantly, because then the runtime analysis for a regular convolution is the size of the image times the size of the kernel used to approximate it. And the runtime for just using the Fourier transform instead is the size of the image times log the size of the image. And when this is processed, it does highlight this area significantly. So the key component of the system which I discovered was this thing called adapted Retnex algorithm. When I first started investigating the algorithm, I realized it was very powerful at enhancing parts of the images that were darker, per se. Like, for example, if there was a shadow, it could enhance the parts underneath it. And I thought, well, what's so different between this part and maybe a fog part of an image? And so I started investigating the mathematical properties of this algorithm. And I ended up starting graphing a couple key equations. And here's one of the most influential in my redefinition of this. Here is just the basic properties of the algorithm. It's the logarithmic ratio between each pixel, which is represented by x, and the background, which is x plus 10. So notice there's a constant difference between the pixel and its background, 10. And naturally, although it's the same difference, it highlights values closer to 0. And so what I realized is, hey, I could take this same principle and highlight whatever value I wanted, even multiple values, multiple vertical asymptotes. And so this is represented by this new equation, where instead I'm centering it around 128. And to give you a brief example of what I'm talking about visually, here's a test image where there's a black rectangle right here and a white rectangle right here. Notice how they're about the same differences respectively toward their background. However, when you run the regular Retnex algorithm on it, the black rectangle is highlighted significantly. And thus, I ideally want both of them highlighted. And here's an example of another example, more visual one, of what I'm talking about. Right here, there's a very good contrast in the foreground, but very poor contrast in the background. And when you run the regular Retnex algorithm on it, it almost eliminates the ship which is hiding behind this fog back here, which is not what we want for this image. Instead, my system targets this part of the image, which does need improvements in contrast, and then uses this as a center for the algorithm, thus highlighting this area with respect to this and enhancing the image. And so in order to do this, I had to play with the properties of logarithms to actually redefine the function. And I made several other adjustments to it itself to improve function. And here's the final result I have. It's in a slightly different presentation. And that's just to redefine it because everyone knows that the domain of log function is 0 exclusive to infinity. So I had to play with it a little bit to get in a suitable form for this. And another example of this effect where instead of choosing the lowest values to highlight, I choose a value that's very common. For example, a white part, right, or white intensity right here in each channel. Here's an example when it's highlighted. You can see more details in the background. Even the color of this tree pops out. And so the final processing, I have to range the values of the Retnex output for each color channel because it doesn't naturally go from 0 to 55. And I do this by scaling. Then I do a weighted average with previous frames for video processing. One of the, problem with just scaling independently by frame is that if you have different scaling coefficients, there may be a flashing effect if the coefficients change too randomly, too rapidly. And so this ensures that there's no rapid flashing of the system becoming too light or too dark, and just the whole video meaning about the same level of lightness. Then for images that are especially plagued by compression artifacts and/or noise, I had my own smoothing algorithm to deal with this. One of the problems is that for a lot of the images I'm processing and showing to you today, that they are not very high quality, and thus there are a lot of compression artifacts. For example, this image, when I process it, it has a ton of compression artifacts underneath of it, although you can see the plane a lot more clearly. And thus what this does is it uses a canny edge detection to identify areas of the image that are worth saving, and then uses a Gaussian smoothing algorithm to move the rest without, breaching the airplane and removing some of its color to the outside. And then finally, I restore some original color to the image using this little calculation because this process does undergo a slight graying. To analyze the effectiveness of this system, I created a local contrast metric, which was inspired by the Webb refraction, where it looks at the difference between each pixel and the respective background. And it's just the absolute value of this difference, which is a little different than Webb refraction. And then I calculated the mean contrast over the image, so the mean of all these pixels. And when I applied it to just a couple images, that this is representative roughly of an increase of contrast throughout the image. For example, these values do increase significantly. One of the key components of this system is that it has a variety of applications, and it could be considered almost universal. And here are a substantial amount of applications. So the first one I'm going to present to you is an underwater application. And it can process this image and enhance a diver in the background, as well as a shadow, and I think he's breathing right there, and some bubbles going up, and thus improving safety underwater. Here, it can also be used for commercial image enhancement, for example here. And then for another example is for night vision enhancement to improve the range of night vision goggles, as exemplified here with this building popping out more significantly. But the main application that I considered was transportation applications. I'm sure that many of you have experienced driving in low visibility situations or maybe even flying, but this system, because it is a digital image processing system, can be easily implemented into various modes of transportation to improve the safety, improve the awareness of however we have of the world around us. For example, in automobiles, you can have it here where it's as a blizzard, and when you process it, you can not only see the road significantly in the distance, but you can see a couple other objects back there that were not visible before. At least I can't tell. And another application is naval, for putting on boats and using it for the Navy in order to improve, so we don't crash into various rocks or other objects. And here's just an example of that, and also for aerial transportation. And as you can see, there are substantial improvements in these images and the content we can obtain from them. So in conclusion, the adaptive rednecks algorithm is very effective in enhancing contrast in imagery. This new system is very effective at enhancing a variety of different types of images that are affected with different problems and need enhancement. And this system is very effective at, yes, it is very effective at that. And here's one last example of an image where there's some things in the foreground, and we'd like to see what's behind it. And when you process this one, there's actually a mountain in the background that's highlighted more significantly. I'd like to thank Dr. Mark Livingston, Jonathan Decker, and Zooming Ali of the Naval Research Laboratory for helping with this project, my teachers and parents, the George Washington University, the Siemens Foundation, and College Board for giving me this opportunity to present to you here today. And here are my references. Thank you.
Well, it's been quite a day. At the close of our final presentation, I'd like to have our students stand and give them a final round of applause. You're all incredible, and I look forward to seeing you tonight because we won't see you immediately after. Our judges are going to go into deliberation after we have a chance to visit with our last presenter, and several of them have to leave tonight in order to go back and teach or continue their research tomorrow morning. So I'd like to, again, thank our judges really from the bottom of my heart for responding to our invitation to join us as our Siemens family of judges, and like to ask you to stand, and let's thank them for coming also. So with that, the judges are going to depart, and I'm going to turn the program over to Jennifer Harper-Taylor, who will tell you about what you're supposed to be doing next. Thank you very much.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I think you guys did a phenomenal job, and we're excited to have the opportunity to listen to your research. We are going to transition now back to the Grand Hyatt. Students, make sure you grab your coats and any other belongings that you have here. On tonight, you'll need to have your neck medals, so make sure that you have those. This is a invited guest affair, so please make sure that your guests are invited. We'll be checking the names as we go on the bus to transition over to the Mellon Auditorium. This is a black tie event, so please have on your best attire. It's an opportunity to recognize you for all of the great work that you've done. We'll be transitioning from here probably within the next 15 minutes, so if you'd like to take a refresher break before you get on the bus, that will be great. We will be leaving the Grand Hyatt Hotel around 6 o'clock, but we're going to start to board the bus and gather in the lobby at 5:45, and that's what's on your schedule. So we'll look forward to seeing you in the lobby at 5:45, and we'll transition over to the Mellon Auditorium afterwards. So again, we're going to transition now to the bus, so grab your belongings, and we'll get ready to go, and after our last competitor comes, we'll transition. All right? Thank you.